Sarah Martinez had always been taught to help others, but she never expected that one random Tuesday morning would change her entire perspective on life. Walking to her job at the local community center in downtown Portland, she noticed an elderly man sitting on a worn cardboard box near the bus stop. His clothes were tattered, his beard unkempt, and his eyes held a sadness that seemed to pierce through the morning fog. Most people hurried past him without a second glance, clutching their coffee cups and checking their phones. Sarah felt something tug at her heart as she watched him shiver in the cold autumn air. She had seen homeless individuals before, but something about this particular man made her pause. Maybe it was the way he sat with such dignity despite his circumstances, or perhaps it was the gentle way he spoke to a stray cat that had wandered near his makeshift shelter. Without thinking twice, Sarah approached him. The man looked up with surprised eyes as she offered him the warm breakfast sandwich she had packed for herself that morning. His weathered hands trembled slightly as he accepted the gift, and when he spoke, his voice was softer than she had expected. "Thank you, miss. You have a kind heart," he said, his words carrying an unexpected eloquence that caught Sarah off guard. There was something in his manner of speaking that didn't quite match his appearance, but she dismissed the thought as quickly as it came. "What's your name?" Sarah asked, crouching down to his level rather than towering over him. "People call me Henry," he replied, carefully unwrapping the sandwich with the reverence of someone who truly understood the value of a meal. "And you are an angel sent from heaven." Sarah laughed softly at his dramatic words, but she could see the genuine gratitude in his eyes. "I'm Sarah. I work at the community center just a few blocks down. Are you okay out here? It's getting colder each day." Henry nodded slowly, taking small, deliberate bites of the sandwich. "I manage fine, Sarah. Been on these streets for quite some time now. You learn to adapt, to find warmth in the smallest kindnesses." He paused, looking directly at her. "Like yours today?" As Sarah continued her walk to work, she couldn't shake the image of Henry from her mind. Throughout her day of organizing community programs and helping families in need, she found herself thinking about the homeless man with the gentle eyes and articulate speech. There was something almost regal about his posture, even while sitting on cardboard in the cold. That evening, Sarah stopped by the grocery store and bought a few extra items. The next morning, she took the same route to work, secretly hoping to see Henry again. Sure enough, he was in the exact same spot, feeding crumbs from an old piece of bread to the same stray cat. "Good morning, Henry," Sarah called out, and she was rewarded with a genuine smile that transformed his entire face. "Sarah, you came back," he said, sounding genuinely pleased. "I wasn't sure if yesterday was just a beautiful dream." Sarah handed him a small bag containing a warm meal, a bottle of water, and a thick pair of socks she had picked up. As Henry accepted the gifts, she noticed his hands again. Despite their dirt and calluses, there was something refined about them, as if they had once been accustomed to finer things. "Tell me about yourself, Henry," Sarah said, settling onto a nearby bench. "How long have you been here?" Henry's eyes grew distant for a moment before he answered. "Time moves differently when you're living day to day. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, sometimes like a lifetime." He carefully placed the socks beside him, as if they were precious treasures. "I used to have a different life, Sarah, a complicated life. But circumstances have a way of humbling us all." There was a weight to his words that made Sarah curious, but she sensed that pushing for details would be inappropriate. Instead, she simply listened as Henry spoke about the changing seasons, the personalities of different shop owners along the street, and his observations about human nature. "You know what I've learned out here?" Henry asked, his voice taking on a philosophical tone. "I've learned that kindness is the rarest currency in the world. Most people are so busy chasing after things that don't really matter that they forget to see the humanity in others." Sarah was struck by his wisdom. Here was a man who had lost everything material, yet he spoke with more insight than many people she knew who lived comfortable lives. As she prepared to leave for work, Henry called out to her, "Sarah, may I ask you something?" His tone was serious now. "Why do you stop? Why do you care about someone like me when the rest of the world pretends I don't exist?" The question caught Sarah by surprise. She thought for a moment before answering honestly. "I don't know, Henry. Maybe because my grandmother always told me that we're all just one tragedy away from needing help ourselves. Maybe because I believe every person has value, regardless of their circumstances." Henry nodded approvingly. "Your grandmother was a wise woman. Hold on to that compassion, Sarah. In a world that's becoming colder every day, people like you are what keep the rest of us believing in goodness." As Sarah walked away that morning, she felt a strange connection to this homeless man. There was clearly more to Henry's story than met the eye, but she respected his privacy. What mattered most was that in a small way she was making his difficult life a little brighter. Over the following days, Sarah found herself looking forward to these brief morning encounters. Henry always had something thoughtful to say, whether it was an observation about the weather, a comment about the people passing by, or a philosophical reflection that left Sarah thinking long after she reached her office. She began to notice small details about him that seemed inconsistent with typical expectations of homelessness. Despite his circumstances, Henry maintained a certain cleanliness about his person. His vocabulary was extensive, and he occasionally made references to art, literature, and world events that suggested a well-educated background. Most intriguingly, Henry had a way of speaking about business and economics that sounded like someone who had once moved in those circles. When Sarah mentioned struggles with funding for her community center programs, Henry offered suggestions that were surprisingly sophisticated and practical. "You should consider creating partnerships with local businesses," he advised one morning. "Offer them visibility in exchange for sponsorship. Many companies want to give back to the community but don't know how to do it effectively." His advice was so spot on that Sarah found herself wondering about his past. But every time she gently probed, Henry would skillfully redirect the conversation, always maintaining his privacy while continuing to show genuine interest in her life and work. 3 weeks had passed since Sarah first met Henry, and their daily morning conversations had become the highlight of her day. What started as simple acts of kindness had evolved into genuine friendship. Henry's wisdom and gentle humor brought a richness to her mornings that she hadn't expected, and she found herself sharing details about her life that she rarely discussed with anyone. Sarah learned that Henry was an exceptional listener. When she talked about her struggles with her demanding job or her concerns about her aging mother, Henry offered perspectives that were both compassionate and practical. His advice was always thoughtful, delivered with a careful consideration that made her feel truly heard. One particularly rainy Thursday morning, Sarah arrived to find Henry huddled under a small overhang, trying to stay dry. His cardboard shelter had been destroyed by the overnight storm, and his few possessions were soaked. Without hesitation, Sarah opened her umbrella over both of them and assessed the situation. "Henry, this is terrible. You can't stay out here in this weather," she said, genuinely worried about his health. The man who had become her friend looked frailer than usual, and she could hear a slight cough that concerned her. "I've weathered worse storms than this, literally and figuratively," Henry replied with a weak smile, but Sarah could see he was struggling more than he wanted to admit. That evening, Sarah couldn't concentrate on anything. She kept thinking about Henry sitting in the rain with nowhere to go. She knew the local shelters were often full, and from conversations with Henry, she understood that he avoided them when possible, preferring the dignity of independence even in harsh conditions. Unable to shake her worry, Sarah made a decision. That surprised even herself. She drove back to Henry's usual spot near midnight, hoping he was still there. Through the rain, she could see him sitting under the overhang, wide awake and shivering despite the heavy coat someone had apparently given him earlier. "Henry!" she called out, pulling up to the curb. "Get in the car!" Henry looked startled. "Sarah, what are you doing here at this hour? You should be home, safe and warm." "So should you," she replied firmly. "I have a guest room that's been empty for months. You can stay there tonight, get dry, and have a proper meal. No arguments." For a moment, Henry seemed to wrestle with the offer. Sarah could see pride battling with necessity in his expression. Finally, he gathered his few belongings and approached the car. "You don't know what this means to me," he said quietly as he settled into the passenger seat. "But I want you to understand that I don't expect this. Your daily kindness has already been more than I deserve. Everyone deserves basic human dignity." "Henry," Sarah replied as she drove through the quiet streets toward her modest apartment. "Besides, you've given me so much wisdom and friendship. This is just returning the favor." At Sarah's apartment, Henry stood in the doorway for a moment, seeming almost overwhelmed by the warmth and comfort of the small but cozy space. Sarah showed him to the guest room, provided him with clean towels and some of her father's old clothes that she had kept after his passing. "There's a bathroom right next door, and please help yourself to anything in the kitchen," she said. "I'll make breakfast in the morning before work." As Henry cleaned up, Sarah prepared a simple dinner. When he emerged from the bathroom, she was struck by the transformation. Clean and wearing proper clothes, Henry looked like a completely different person. His posture seemed straighter, his movements more confident, and there was something almost distinguished about his appearance. During dinner, they talked more openly than they ever had before. Henry shared stories about places he had traveled, books he had read, and experiences that painted a picture of someone who had lived a very different life than his current circumstances suggested. "You know, Sarah," Henry said as they finished their meal, "I've been thinking a lot about your community center. You mentioned that you're struggling to expand your youth programs because of funding limitations." Sarah nodded. "It's frustrating. There are so many kids who need safe places to go after school, but we can barely keep our current programs running." Henry leaned forward, his expression thoughtful. "What if I told you there are foundations and wealthy individuals who specifically look for grassroots organizations like yours to support? The key is knowing how to approach them properly." "Do you really think that could work?" Sarah asked, intrigued by his sudden passion for the subject. "I'm absolutely certain of it," Henry replied with unexpected conviction. "Sometimes the most impactful charitable work happens at the community level, but these organizations need help connecting with funding sources that align with their missions." That night, as Sarah lay in bed, she reflected on the evening's conversations. Henry's knowledge about fundraising and his understanding of how wealthy philanthropists operated seemed unusually detailed. She had initially assumed his insights came from observation or perhaps past volunteer work, but the more he spoke, the more she realized his knowledge was far too specific and nuanced for that. The next morning, Sarah woke to the smell of coffee and eggs cooking. She found Henry in her kitchen preparing breakfast with an ease that suggested he was quite comfortable in domestic settings despite his recent circumstances. "I hope you don't mind," he said, looking slightly embarrassed. "I wanted to contribute something after your incredible hospitality." "Of course not," Sarah replied, touched by his thoughtfulness. "This smells amazing." Over breakfast, Henry continued their conversation about the community center. He had apparently spent time during the night thinking about specific strategies for Sarah's funding challenges. "There's a particular approach to grant writing that many people miss," he explained, speaking with the confidence of someone who understood the process intimately. "Donors want to see measurable impact and sustainable growth plans. They also want to feel connected to the cause on a personal level." Sarah listened carefully, taking notes on her phone. Henry's suggestions were incredibly sophisticated, involving detailed financial projections, community impact assessments, and strategic partnerships that demonstrated advanced knowledge of nonprofit management. "Henry, where did you learn all of this?" Sarah finally asked, unable to contain her curiosity any longer. For a moment, Henry's expression became guarded, the same way it did whenever she asked about his past. But this time, instead of deflecting, he seemed to consider his answer more carefully. "I've had experience with charitable organizations," he said finally. "Let's just say that in my former life, I was involved in situations where I learned about both sides of philanthropy." Before Sarah could ask follow-up questions, Henry changed the subject, asking about her plans for the day and insisting that he would return to his usual spot rather than impose further on her hospitality. As they prepared to leave together, Sarah noticed something she had missed the night before. Despite Henry's humble gratitude and insistence that he didn't deserve her help, he moved through her apartment with a natural familiarity with middle-class comforts. He knew exactly how to operate her coffee machine, understood the settings, on her shower, and handled her dishes with the care of someone accustomed to nice things. More puzzling still was a moment when Henry's phone buzzed during breakfast. Sarah hadn't realized he had a phone, but he quickly silenced it and tucked it away, looking uncomfortable about the interruption. In the brief glimpse she had, the phone appeared to be a newer model than what she would have expected a homeless person to possess. The week following Henry's stay at her apartment, Sarah noticed subtle changes in their daily interactions that left her increasingly curious about her mysterious friend. While Henry had returned to his cardboard shelter and resumed his routine of sitting by the bus stop, something had shifted in his demeanor. He seemed more relaxed around her, more willing to share insights about topics that revealed surprising depth of knowledge. On Monday morning, Sarah found Henry reading a discarded newspaper, but not just any section. He was deeply engrossed in the financial pages, moving his finger along stock listings with the practiced eye of someone who understood market fluctuations. When he noticed her approaching, he quickly folded the paper, but not before Sarah caught a glimpse of notes he had been making in the margins. "Good morning, Henry," she said, offering him the usual breakfast and coffee. "Checking up on the stock market?" Henry smiled, a slightly embarrassed expression crossing his face. "Old habits," he said cryptically. "I find the financial markets fascinating from an academic perspective. All those numbers represent real people's hopes and dreams, their retirement plans, their children's college funds." Sarah sat down beside him, more intrigued than ever. "You seem to understand it quite well. Did you work in finance before?" "In a way," Henry replied carefully. "I was involved in business decisions that required understanding market dynamics, but that feels like a lifetime ago now." As they talked, Sarah noticed that Henry's phone buzzed several times. Each time he glanced at it quickly before putting it away, and she could see tension in his shoulders whenever it happened. The calls seemed to make him uncomfortable, yet he never turned the phone off completely. "Henry, is everything okay? You seem worried about something," Sarah asked gently. Henry looked at her with an expression that mixed gratitude with something that looked like guilt. "You're very perceptive, Sarah. There are some complications in my life that I'm trying to resolve. Nothing dangerous, just complicated." That afternoon at work, Sarah found herself distracted by thoughts about Henry. Her colleague, Maria, noticed her preoccupation and asked what was bothering her. "There's this homeless man I've been helping," Sarah explained. "But the more I get to know him, the more I feel like there's something he's not telling me. He's incredibly educated, gives amazing advice about business and fundraising, and sometimes I catch glimpses of expensive-looking things like a nice phone." Maria raised an eyebrow. "Maybe he wasn't always homeless? Some people lose everything in divorces, medical bankruptcies, business failures. It doesn't mean he's hiding anything sinister." Sarah nodded, knowing Maria was probably right. But something nagging at her suggested Henry's situation was more complex than a simple fall from grace. That evening, she decided to take a different route home, one that would take her past Henry's usual evening location. What she saw confused her even more. Henry was sitting with another man, someone wearing an expensive suit who clearly wasn't homeless. They were having what appeared to be an intense conversation, with the suited man occasionally showing Henry documents from a leather briefcase. When Henry noticed Sarah approaching, he quickly said something to his companion, who immediately packed up and left. "Sarah," Henry called out, his voice carrying a forced cheerfulness. "What brings you by this evening?" "I was just in the neighborhood," she lied, studying his face. "Who was that man you were talking to?" Henry's expression became guarded again. "Just someone I knew from before. He was updating me on some old business matters that need to be resolved." "Business matters?" Sarah couldn't hide her confusion. "Henry, what kind of business matters could you have while living on the street?" For a moment, Henry looked like he was going to provide another vague answer, but something in Sarah's expression must have convinced him that she deserved more honesty. "Sarah, my situation is more complicated than it appears," he said slowly. "I am homeless, that's absolutely true. I do need the food and kindness you've given me. But there are aspects of my life that I haven't shared because they're difficult to explain." "Try me," Sarah said softly, settling down beside him. "After everything we've shared, I think I deserve to know who you really are." Henry was quiet for a long moment, staring at his hands. "What would you say if I told you that sometimes people choose to live this way, not because they have to, but because they need to understand something important about life?" "I'd say that sounds like someone with options that most homeless people don't have," Sarah replied honestly. Henry nodded slowly. "You're right. And that makes me incredibly privileged, even in this situation. But it also makes my reasons for being here something that most people wouldn't understand." Before Sarah could respond, Henry's phone rang again. This time, instead of ignoring it, he answered, but stepped away for privacy. Sarah could hear fragments of the conversation, words like board meeting, quarterly reports, and strategic decisions that made no sense in the context of someone living on the street. When Henry returned, he looked troubled. "Sarah, I need to ask you something important. Over these weeks, you've shown me more genuine kindness than I've experienced in years. You've treated me like a human being when most people look right through me. That means everything to me." "Of course, Henry. You're my friend. That's exactly why this is so difficult," Henry continued. "I'm going to have to disappear soon, not because I want to, but because some responsibilities in my life are demanding my attention. Before I go, though, I want to help you with your community center." Henry reached into his jacket and pulled out a manila envelope. "These are detailed funding proposals for your youth programs, complete with budget projections, impact assessments, and contact information for 3 foundations that I know would be interested in supporting your work." Sarah opened the envelope and was amazed by the professional quality of the documents. The proposals were more sophisticated and thorough than anything she could have created herself, with financial models and strategic plans that demonstrated expert knowledge of non-profit management. "Henry, this is incredible work. This must have taken you dozens of hours to prepare," she said, flipping through the pages. "But how did you get all this information about foundations and their funding priorities?" "I told you I had experience with both sides of philanthropy," Henry replied, but his tone suggested there was much more to the story. As Sarah continued reading, she noticed something that made her heart skip. At the bottom of one of the financial projections was a small logo she recognized from news articles about major charitable giving. It was the symbol of one of the largest private foundations in the country, an organization that gave away hundreds of millions of dollars annually. "Henry," she said carefully, pointing to the logo, "this foundation logo, how did you get access to their internal document templates?" Henry's face went pale. "What do you mean?" "This isn't just information about the foundation," Sarah explained, her mind racing. "These are internal document formats that only someone with direct access would have, someone who works with them regularly or has some kind of insider connection." "For The first time since she'd known him, Henry looked genuinely flustered. His usual composure cracked, and she could see him struggling with how much truth to reveal. "Sarah, there are things about my life that I haven't told you because I was afraid they would change how you see me," he said finally. "I was afraid you would treat me differently if you knew." "Knew what, Henry?" Sarah asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer would be far more extraordinary than anything she had imagined. The tension in the air was thick as Henry struggled with his internal battle between honesty and secrecy. Sarah waited patiently, but her mind was spinning with possibilities. The professional documents, the mysterious phone calls, the expensive phone, the man in the suit, and now the foundation logo that suggested insider access to major philanthropic organizations. "Henry, please," Sarah said gently. "Whatever it is, it can't change the friendship we've built. You've been living on the street, needing food and shelter. That's real, regardless of whatever else might be true about your situation." Henry looked up at her with eyes that held years of weariness. "What if I told you that everything you think you know about poverty and wealth, about deserving and undeserving, about who needs help and who doesn't, is more complicated than it appears?" "I'd say that life is always more complicated than it appears," Sarah replied. "But I'd also say that the man who has been my friend for these past weeks, the one who shared wisdom and gratitude and genuine human connection, that person is real no matter what else I learn about him." Henry's phone buzzed again, and this time he didn't ignore it. He looked at the screen, and Sarah could see something that looked like resignation cross his features. "I have to take this call," he said. "But afterward, I'm going to tell you everything. You deserve that much after the kindness you've shown me." Henry walked a few steps away and answered the phone. Even trying not to eavesdrop, Sarah could hear parts of the conversation that made her pulse quicken. "Yes, I understand the urgency," Henry was saying. "Tell the board that I'll be back tomorrow morning. Cancel my other appointments for the rest of the week. And yes, prepare the quarterly donation reports for my review." When Henry returned, his entire demeanor had changed. The careful posture of someone trying to remain invisible was gone, replaced by the bearing of someone accustomed to making important decisions and being listened to. "Sarah, my real name is Henry Winston," he began, his voice now carrying an authority she had never heard before. "And I am, as you've probably begun to suspect, not actually homeless." Sarah felt her world tilt slightly. "What do you mean, not actually homeless? You've been living on the street. I've seen you every day, in all kinds of weather." "I have been living on the street," Henry confirmed. "That part is completely true, but it was a choice, not a necessity. I am the chairman and primary beneficiary of the Winston Foundation, one of the largest private charitable foundations in the United States." The words hung in the air between them as Sarah tried to process what she was hearing. The Winston Foundation was a name she recognized from news articles about major philanthropic initiatives. They funded education programs, homeless shelters, community development projects, and disaster relief efforts around the world. "You're telling me you're a billionaire who chose to live on the street?" Sarah asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm telling you that I'm a man who inherited vast wealth and spent years giving it away without truly understanding what it meant to need help," Henry replied. "I sat in boardrooms making decisions about funding homeless shelters while never having experienced what it actually meant to be homeless. I approved millions of dollars for programs while having no real comprehension of the daily reality faced by the people we claim to help." Sarah stared at him, trying to reconcile this revelation with the man who had gratefully accepted her breakfast sandwiches every morning. So this was all an experiment? Some kind of research project? It started that way, Henry admitted. 2 months ago, I decided I needed to understand poverty from the inside before I could make responsible decisions about how to address it. I thought I would spend a few weeks on the street, learn what I needed to know, and return to my comfortable life with better insight. "And what happened?" Henry's expression grew complex, mixing shame with something that looked like enlightenment. What happened was that I discovered I knew nothing about human nature, about dignity, about what it actually means to need help. Within the first week, I realized that all my assumptions about homelessness were wrong. Sarah began to understand. And then I came along. And then you came along, Henry confirmed. The first person in years who treated me with genuine kindness without wanting anything in return. You didn't know who I was, you couldn't benefit from helping me, yet you chose to see me as worthy of basic human decency. Sarah felt a mixture of emotions washing over her. Part of her was angry at the deception. Part of her was amazed by the revelation. And part of her was trying to understand what this meant for their friendship. So when you gave me all that sophisticated advice about fundraising and foundation, grants, she said slowly, you weren't just sharing knowledge from past experience. You were literally one of the people who makes those decisions. Exactly, Henry nodded. And when I prepared those funding proposals for your community center, I wasn't just hoping they might work. I was ensuring they would work because I have the authority to approve them. Sarah stood up and walked a few steps away, needing space to think. The generosity that had seemed so meaningful now felt complicated. Was Henry's help genuine friendship? Or was it wealthy guilt trying to solve problems with money? Sarah, Henry called softly. I know this is overwhelming. I know it changes everything. But I need you to understand something important. She turned, back to face him. These past weeks have been the most real I've felt in years, Henry continued. Your friendship wasn't based on what I could do for you or how I could benefit your life. You cared about Henry the homeless man, not Henry the billionaire. That meant everything to me. But it was built on a lie, Sarah said, struggling with her emotions. Was it? Henry asked. I was genuinely hungry when you shared your food. I was genuinely cold when you brought me warm clothes. I was genuinely lonely when you stopped to talk with me instead of hurrying past like everyone else. The circumstances were unusual, but my gratitude was completely real. Sarah considered this. It was true that Henry had never asked her for anything beyond their daily conversations. He had accepted her kindness graciously, but had never attempted to manipulate her generosity or extract more help than she freely offered. Why are you telling me now? She asked. Because that phone call was from my assistant. There's a crisis at the foundation that requires my immediate attention, Henry explained. I have to return to my regular life tomorrow. I couldn't disappear without explaining the truth to the one person who showed me what genuine compassion looks like. As the reality of the situation settled in, Sarah realized that this revelation didn't actually change the core of what she had experienced with Henry. The conversations, the wisdom, the mutual respect, and the friendship had all been authentic, even if the context was extraordinary. What happens now? She asked. Henry smiled sadly. Now I go back to my world of boardrooms and financial reports and strategic philanthropic planning. But I go back as someone who finally understands what our work actually means to the people we're trying to help. And what happens to us? To our friendship? That, Henry said, depends entirely on whether you can forgive me for not telling you sooner, and whether you're willing to let our friendship continue despite the unusual circumstances of how it began. The next morning, Sarah arrived at Henry's usual spot by the bus stop, unsure if he would still be there after their revelatory conversation the night before. Her sleep had been restless, filled with questions about authenticity, friendship, and what it meant to truly help someone. To her relief and surprise, Henry was sitting in his familiar position, but something was different about his appearance. He was clean-shaven for the first time since she'd known him, wearing clothes that, while still simple, were clearly new and well-fitted. Most noticeably, his posture had changed completely. Gone was the defeated slouch of someone trying to remain invisible. In its place was the confident bearing of someone comfortable with authority and decision-making. "Good morning, Sarah," Henry said as she approached, his voice carrying the same warmth but with an underlying confidence she'd never heard before. "I wasn't sure if you would come today." "I wasn't sure either," Sarah admitted, sitting down beside him with the breakfast she had prepared out of habit. "I've been thinking all night about everything you told me." Henry accepted the food with the same gratitude he always showed, despite the dramatic revelation of his true circumstances. "I understand if you need time to process all of this. I understand if you feel like our friendship was built on false pretenses." Sarah watched him carefully as he spoke. Even knowing the truth about his wealth and status, she could see that his appreciation for her simple act of kindness remained genuine. Whatever else might be complicated about their situation, his gratitude was real. "Henry, can I ask you something?" Sarah said. "Now that I know who you are, I need to understand your motivations. When you decided to live on the street as an experiment, what were you hoping to accomplish?" Henry considered the question thoughtfully. "Honestly, I think I was hoping to ease my conscience. I've spent years giving away hundreds of millions of dollars, funding programs and initiatives that are supposed to help people in need. But deep down, I knew I was making decisions about problems I didn't really understand." "And what did you learn?" "I learned that I was treating poverty like a mathematical problem to be solved rather than a human experience to be understood," Henry replied. "I learned that dignity matters more than money sometimes, that human connection can be more valuable than financial assistance, and that the way help is offered can be as important as the help itself." As they talked, Sarah noticed a black sedan pull up across the street. A man in a suit stepped out and approached them, speaking respectfully to Henry. "Mr. Winston, the board meeting has been moved up to 10 o'clock. We need to leave within the next few minutes if you're going to make it on time." Henry nodded to the man, who returned to the car to wait. The contrast between Henry's current appearance and surroundings and the obvious deference of the suited assistant created a surreal moment that highlighted just how extraordinary their entire situation had become. "That's my world calling, Henry," said to Sarah. "But before I go, I want to make you an offer, though I'm afraid of how you might interpret it." Sarah braced herself, unsure what to expect. "Your community center needs funding, and my foundation needs better guidance about how to direct our resources toward programs that actually make a difference in people's lives," Henry continued. "I would like to offer you a position as Director of Community Outreach for the Winston Foundation. You would help us understand grassroots needs and ensure our funding goes to organizations that genuinely serve their communities." The offer was so unexpected that Sarah couldn't immediately respond. The position Henry was describing would be a significant career advancement, potentially life-changing in terms of both professional opportunities and financial security. "Henry, I don't know what to say," Sarah finally managed. "That's an incredible opportunity, but I have to ask. Are you offering this because of my qualifications, or because you feel guilty about not telling me the truth?" "Both," Henry answered, honestly. "I am offering it partly because I feel obligated to do something meaningful for the person who showed me such kindness. But I'm also offering it because these past weeks have convinced me that you understand community needs in a way that most people in philanthropic work don't." Sarah appreciated his honesty, but she was troubled by the implications of accepting such an offer. "If I take this position, how do I know that our friendship was real and not just you evaluating a potential employee?" Henry's expression grew serious. "You don't know that, and I can't prove it to you. What I can tell you is that your friendship has been the most valuable thing I've received in years, far more valuable than any professional service you could provide to my foundation." The sedan's driver honked softly, indicating that Henry's time was running short. The reality of his return to his billionaire lifestyle was becoming undeniably immediate. "I need more time to think about this," Sarah said. "This is all happening so fast, and I want to make sure any decision I make is for the right reasons." "Of course," Henry agreed, standing up and gathering the few possessions he had maintained during his time on the street. "Take all the time you need, but Sarah, regardless, Of what you decide about the job offer, I hope you'll consider maintaining our friendship." "What would that even look like?" Sarah asked. "You'll be back in boardrooms and charity galas, and I'll be at the community center trying to stretch our limited budget. How do we bridge that gap?" Henry paused, clearly having wrestled with the same question. "I don't know yet, but I know that I don't want to lose the one relationship in my life that was built on genuine human connection rather than wealth or social status." As Henry prepared to leave, Sarah felt a strange mixture of loss and possibility. The man who had been her homeless friend was disappearing, but in his place was someone with the power to create significant positive change in the world if he chose to use his experience wisely. "Henry, before you go, I need to tell you something," Sarah said. "These past weeks, you taught me as much as I taught you. You showed me that everyone has wisdom to share, regardless of their circumstances. You reminded me why I chose to do community work in the first place." Henry smiled, and for a moment, Sarah could see both versions of him simultaneously. The vulnerable man who had gratefully accepted her breakfast sandwiches, and the powerful philanthropist who could transform. "Lives with his decisions. That means more to me than you know," Henry said. "Whatever you decide about the job offer, please know that you've changed how I see my responsibility to use my wealth meaningfully." As Henry walked toward the sedan, he turned back once more. "Sarah, the funding proposals I prepared for your community center are real, and they'll be approved regardless of your decision about working with the foundation. Your programs deserve support, and your community deserves someone who advocates for them the way you do." Sarah watched as Henry got into the sedan, and she realized she was witnessing the end of one extraordinary chapter of their relationship and the potential beginning of another. The car pulled away, taking Henry back to his world of immense wealth and responsibility, but leaving Sarah with questions that would shape her future decisions. That evening, Sarah sat in her apartment reviewing the funding proposals Henry had prepared. The level of detail and the potential impact on her community programs was staggering. If approved, the grants would allow her community center to expand their youth programs, add educational components, and provide services to dozens of additional families. But more than the financial impact, Sarah found herself thinking about Henry's transformation and what it meant for both of them. She had witnessed something remarkable, a wealthy man choosing to genuinely understand the problems he was trying to solve, rather than simply throwing money at them from a distance. The next morning, Sarah made her way to the bus stop out of habit, even though she knew Henry wouldn't be there. The space where he had sat for so many weeks felt empty, but not in a sad way. Instead, it felt like a place where something important had happened, where two very different worlds had intersected in a way that changed both people involved. As Sarah continued to work, she found herself applying lessons she had learned from her conversations with Henry, his insights about the dignity of receiving help, about the importance of treating people as individuals rather than cases to be solved, and about the value of genuine human connection began to influence how she approached her work at the community center. 3 days later, Sarah received a formal letter from the Winston Foundation. The funding proposals Henry had prepared had been unanimously approved by the board of directors, with a note indicating that this was the beginning of a long-term partnership with her community center. But along with the official correspondence was a handwritten note from Henry. "Sarah, thank you for showing me what it means to help someone without expecting anything in return. Your friendship gave me something no amount of money could buy, the understanding that genuine kindness is the most powerful force for change in the world. I hope we can continue to learn from each other, regardless of the roles we play in each other's lives." 2 weeks after Henry's revelation and return to his billionaire lifestyle, Sarah received an unexpected phone call that would once again change the direction of her life. She was organizing supplies for the community center's expanded youth program, funded by the Winston Foundation grant that had been approved with remarkable speed when her phone rang. "Sarah, it's Henry. came the familiar voice, though now it carried the confident tone of someone back in his element of power and authority. I hope I'm not calling at a bad time. Henry. No, it's fine. I was just thinking about you, actually, Sarah replied, genuinely pleased to hear from him. I was looking at all the new equipment we were able to purchase with the foundation grant. The kids are going to be so excited. That's wonderful to hear, Henry said, and Sarah could detect real satisfaction in his voice. Actually, that's part of why I'm calling. I have a proposition for you, though I want you to know there's no pressure to accept. Sarah had been expecting this call, knowing that Henry's job offer was still on the table. She had spent the past 2 weeks carefully considering what accepting such a position would mean for her career, her values, and her friendship with Henry. I'm listening, she said. The board of directors has been incredibly impressed with the funding proposal format you and I developed together, Henry began. More importantly, I've been sharing some of the insights I gained during my time on the street, and they've realized that our foundation has been making decisions without truly understanding the communities we're trying to help. Henry paused, and Sarah could hear the sounds of a busy office in the background, reminding her of the vast difference between their current circumstances. We want to create a new position, Director of Community Integration, Henry continued. The role would involve identifying grassroots organizations like your community center. But more than that, it would involve helping our foundation understand how to support communities in ways that actually empower them rather than creating dependence. The position Henry was describing was different from his original offer, and Sarah could tell that his experience living on the street had influenced how he was thinking about philanthropic work. What would that look like practically? Sarah asked. You would spend time in communities getting to know local leaders and understanding real needs from the ground up, Henry explained. Then you would help design funding approaches that support community-driven solutions rather than imposing external ideas about what help should look like. Sarah was intrigued. This wasn't just a job offer, it was an opportunity to influence how one of the country's largest foundations approached charitable work. The potential impact could extend far beyond her local community. Henry, this sounds like an incredible opportunity, but I need to ask you something directly, Sarah said. Are you offering me this position because you believe I'm the best person for the job, or because you feel obligated to me because of our friendship? Henry's answer came without hesitation. Sarah, I'm offering you this position because the past 2 weeks have convinced me that traditional philanthropy is fundamentally flawed. We need people who understand communities from the inside, who can help us support real solutions rather than feel-good projects that don't actually change anything. And you think I can do that? I know you can do that, Henry replied firmly. But more than your qualifications, I trust you. I've seen how you treat people with dignity, how you listen before making assumptions, and how you understand that helping someone effectively requires understanding their actual situation. Sarah walked to her office window, looking out at the neighborhood she had served for years. Taking Henry's offer would mean leaving her direct service work, but it could also mean influencing how resources reached thousands of communities across the country. If I accept this position, what happens to our friendship? Sarah asked. I don't want our personal relationship to be complicated by professional obligations. That's something we'll have to navigate carefully, Henry admitted. But Sarah, I hope you know that your friendship has been one of the most meaningful experiences of my life. I don't want to lose that, regardless of what professional relationship we might have. After several more minutes of discussion, Sarah asked for a week to make her decision. Henry agreed immediately, emphasizing again that there was no pressure and that their friendship would remain unchanged regardless of her choice. That evening, Sarah called her mother to discuss the opportunity. Her mother, who had always been her most trusted advisor, listened carefully to the entire story of Henry's revelation and the job offer. Sweetheart, her mother said after a long pause, it sounds like you have the chance to take everything you've learned about helping people and apply it on a much larger scale. Isn't that what you've always wanted? But what if I accept the job for the wrong reasons? Sarah asked. What if I'm just attracted to the salary and the status? What if you are? Her mother replied. Even if part of your motivation is personal, advancement, that doesn't invalidate the good you could do in that position. Sometimes, the best way to help your community is to put yourself in a position where you have more power to create change. The next morning, Sarah made her decision. She called Henry and accepted the position, but with conditions. She wanted to maintain her part-time involvement with her current community center. She wanted the authority to advocate for funding approaches that might be unconventional, and she wanted assurance that her role would be to influence foundation, policy, not just implement existing strategies. Henry agreed to all of her conditions without hesitation. Sarah, the whole point of creating this position is to change how we do our work. If you're just implementing our existing approaches, then we haven't accomplished anything. 3 months later, Sarah found herself in a conference room with the Winston Foundation's board of directors, presenting a funding strategy that would have seemed impossible before her friendship with Henry. Instead of the foundation deciding which programs to support and then finding organizations to implement them, Sarah's approach involved identifying existing community solutions and providing support to help those solutions expand. The key insight, Sarah explained to the board, is that communities already know what they need. Our role should be to amplify their existing strengths rather than imposing our ideas about what help should look like. As she spoke, Sarah caught Henry's eye across the conference table. He smiled at her with obvious pride, and she realized that their unusual friendship had evolved into something even more meaningful, a partnership that was genuinely changing how resources reached people who needed them. After the meeting, Henry approached Sarah in the hallway. "That was brilliant," he said. "You've helped us understand that effective philanthropy isn't about wealthy people solving problems for poor people. It's about wealthy people supporting solutions that communities develop for themselves." "I learned that from a very wise homeless man," Sarah replied with a smile. "He taught me that everyone has something valuable to offer, regardless of their circumstances." Henry laughed. That homeless man learned a few things too. He learned that wealth can be a tool for good, but only if it's guided by genuine understanding and human connection. As they walked together toward Sarah's new office, both of them understood that their friendship had become something larger than either of them had expected. What began as simple acts of kindness between a community worker and a homeless man had evolved into a partnership that was reshaping how one of the country's most influential foundations approached charitable work. Sarah's daily routine no longer included morning visits to a bus stop, but the lessons she learned during those conversations continued to guide her work. And Henry, now back in his world of wealth and influence, carried with him a deep understanding of what it meant to truly need help and to receive it with dignity. Their friendship had proven that authentic human connection could bridge any gap, whether between rich and poor, powerful and vulnerable, or helper and helped. Most importantly, it had shown both of them that the most meaningful changes in the world happen when people see past circumstances and status to recognize the fundamental humanity in everyone they meet.